So there's a really good article over the last couple of days from Madeline Kenny of the Mercury News, interviewing Joe Lacob and getting some comments on some of the off-season activity from the Warriors. And this thing really stood out to me, this quote. I just want to read it to you. He says, "There's no such thing as the two timelines. There never was and still isn't and never will be. There's only one timeline, and the timeline is every year to put the best product on the floor, to have the best team, to compete the best you can to win a championship." That's Joe Lacob's quote in this article from Madeline Kenny. And look, Lacob's right to a degree, obviously. And he can say what he wants and he can think what he wants. He's entitled to that. He's a fantastic owner. And I don't want to rip Joe Lacob in any way because I think every Warrior fan should be ecstatic that he's the owner. His capacity to spend money and how he's handled this team since he took over a decade ago has been nothing short of extraordinary and fantastic. However, I do think he's trying to rewrite history here by trying to resist the notion that there was never a two-timeline approach. And if you look at the Warriors drafting, especially since Wiseman was taken, second overall pick in 2020, that would indicate completely differently to what he's trying to say here. And what he's trying to say here is actually trying to rewrite history simply because the two-timeline approach from Golden State hasn't worked out. It simply hasn't. They got rid of Wiseman at the trade deadline, and now their most proven young piece, Jordan Poole, has been traded for a 38-year-old Chris Paul. They have given up on the two-timeline approach to take a win-now approach, which I think most Warrior fans are very happy with because they want to maximize and prioritize Stephen Curry, who's now 35 years old. So that's great. But you can't then tell us that, hey, we never actually had a two-timeline approach in place. Well, you did. You absolutely did. Because if you didn't, then you probably would have dealt Wiseman before you did. You probably would have dealt him last offseason when you basically had the choice between him and Gary Payton II. And you let Gary Payton II walk when he got a 3-year, $27 million deal from the Trailblazers when you had Wiseman on the roster for practically the same money. You could have traded Wiseman at that point and been able to keep Payton. And that would have been more of a win-now approach, obviously. The whole Poole thing comes down to the fact that they are prioritizing their aging core. They specifically prioritize Draymond Green over Jordan Poole. I think we all understand that it was becoming an untenable situation for Jordan Poole and Draymond Green to be playing on the same team from next season and beyond. And the Warriors chose Draymond Green. Even if initially they didn't. They gave Poole the extension, 4-year, 128. They traded Poole, knowing full well they were going to bring back Draymond Green a couple of weeks later. And they did, 4-year, $100 million extension for Draymond Green. So I think by trying to change the narrative here of saying, oh no, there wasn't a two-timeline approach in place, I think that's not really giving respect to the knowledge of the fan base, because I think the fan base is knowledgeable enough to understand that this is nothing but trying to rewrite history and trying to change a narrative simply because the plan hasn't worked out. Now, have the Warriors been trying to win a championship since they drafted Wiseman in 2020? Absolutely, and they did. They did in 2022. Fantastic. However, every one of the young players outside Poole really didn't have an impact on that. It was the aging core. It was the likes of Otto Porter Jr. It was Gary Payton II, who they lost and then brought back. It was Andrew Wiggins. It was Loon. Everyone outside Poole of the Warrior younger players didn't have an impact. Wiseman didn't play a game that season. Kuminga and Moody were in their rookie year. Let's not try and rewrite history and say that there was never a two-timeline approach in place. How much trade speculation did we see regarding Wiseman before he was dealt? How much trade speculation did we see regarding the 7th and 14th overall picks before they ultimately took Jonathan Kuminga and Moses Moody? So to suggest that there wasn't a two-timeline approach in place, to suggest that there wasn't a desire to create a dynamic where you could have your cake and eat it too and try and have sustained success for a 15 to 20 year plus period, like, that's just false. It just is. I'm sorry, Joe. I love you. You've been fantastic. That's just a false narrative to try and rearrange, basically. But I mean, I think most Warrior fans are pretty happy with the direction that the franchise is now taking, where there's a prioritising Stephen Curry. And that's embodied by the fact they've got rid of Wiseman, they've got rid of Poole, and they've brought in a 38-year-old Chris Paul.